Weak Boy is the only one that can level up, so he becomes the strongest with all stats maxed out. Jinwoo is an ugly, disgusting loser with nothing on his life. His father went to buy milk and his mother is in a coma. This leaves him a broke, useless guy who will do anything to feed his younger sister. 10 years ago, huge gates appeared all around the planet, releasing several monsters. Humanity had no chance to fight back as weapons didn't deal any damage. However, some humans awakened some powers and became known as hunters. Hunters are classified based on their magical power from E rank to S rank. And since they cannot level up or increase their rank, they can only be stronger by getting better gear. Until this day, humans still clear those gates called dungeons in order to get magic crystals which can be sold for profit. We then see Jinwoo arrive to a dungeon site where everyone greets him. Upon noticing this, one of the hunters asks him if Jinwoo is someone strong. Yet Kim replies that Jinwoo is famous for being the weakest hunter of all mankind who once went to hospital while raiding the weakest dungeon. While walking, Jinwoo hears Juhi's voice asking why he's covered in bandages. Jinwoo explains her that he got hurt during his last raid, mostly because there wasn't a healer in the party. Juhi complains that's reckless, but Jinwoo admits that it's his fault because he's weak. They're called as the raid is about to start and Song, an experienced hunter, promises to lead the party. As Jinwoo is about to enter the gate, he pulls out his knife E rank. This is the only piece of equipment he can afford, but still, he will give his best today and enters the dungeon. Once inside, Jinwoo manages to defeat a goblin and gets its crystal. Suddenly, Goblin attacks him, but he manages to block the attack. The goblin continues attacking, but he evades everything. He tries to attack, however, when he does, his garbage knife breaks, allowing the goblin to stab him. Another hunter comes to defeat the goblin and Juhi heals Jinwoo. Minutes later, the group manages to defeat the dungeon boss, but Jinwoo is being healed once again. He was the only person who got injured in this party. She wants to know why he's trying to be a hunter so bad despite being weak, but Jinwoo just apologizes. The group is dividing the drops until someone notices another entrance nearby. Everyone is confused, but Song reveals that sometimes there is double dungeons. They decide to explore it despite being against the rules. In this situation, they should usually report to the Hunter Association, however, that will mean they will lose all drops. Since this is a D rank gate, they think it should be fine and decide to vote if they should try the second boss or not. The vote is a draw, with Juhi being one of the 6 who said no. The last vote is Jinwoo's, the 13th party member. Jinwoo knows that this dungeon is dangerous for him, but he needs the money. He wants to send his younger sister through college and must also pay his mother's treatment fees. Therefore, to protect his family, he votes yes. With that decision, the group moves forward to explore the dungeon. Juhi uses this time to complain about his desire for death and flirts with him, making him promise to take her out for dinner. The group then reaches a big door, which confuses everyone because there's no boss rooms with doors. They think this is strange, but since they're all greedy, they decide to step in. The torches all around the room start to light up. The group see several statues standing around the room, and Jinwoo notices another one sitting on what it seems to be a throne. Jinwoo thinks this one is the bigger one, but the group starts to mention how they feel like they're being watched. They then notice something strange. There are no monsters inside the room. Song then notices the floor and sees what it seems to be a magic circle. Kim calls Song out, mentioning there is a statue with something written. Everyone gets near the angel statue and notice the inscription. Song reads it out loud, mentioning those are the commandments of the Kartanan Temple. First, they must worship God. Second, praise the god. Third, believe in God. And those who don't obey should die. Juhi freaks out and calls Jinwoo, mentioning the eyes of the giant statue moved and looked at them. Jinwoo says she must be imagining. Suddenly, the door closes. Everyone freaks out and someone tries to run to the doors to escape. He touches the door and suddenly a statue moves and slices his head off. Everyone starts screaming and Jinwoo falls into despair, thinking the guy who just died is a lot stronger than him. He doesn't understand why this monster could be in a D rank dungeon. Jinwoo then looks at the bigger statue, paying attention to every detail until he sees its eyes moving to look at him. Jinwoo starts having a flashback about the moments he faced life and death situations. Since he was broke and weak, he had to look for loopholes to survive. He had to observe everything in detail to get his chance. Upon returning to reality, Jinwoo shouts at them to get down. The huge statue shoots a laser beam with its eyes, killing several hunters. Luckily, Jinwoo managed to save Juhee, but she's panicking in fear. He looks around confused about what happened and how they ended up like this. He knows they're trapped and cannot escape. Song approaches Jinwoo and asks how Jinwoo knew about it, but he replies that he just sensed danger. Jinwoo then notices that Song's arm is missing, but the old man says it's okay and asks him to stop the bleeding. Jinwoo warps bandages around Song's arm, who reveals that he's been into some B-rank raids, but knows that this place must be an S-rank dungeon. Song tells Jinwoo it's a bad idea to fight the statue, and they should find a way to escape. However, a brain-damaged guy refuses to die like this. He just signed a contract with a major guild and won't die here. The guy starts running forward, mentioning that he's confident that he's faster than the Flash, but the huge statue looks at him and destroys him. Everyone starts to panic, and Jinwoo wonders why the statue hasn't killed them yet. He then thinks about the commandments and thinks this dungeon has some special rules. He gets up and notices the statue preparing to attack. He suddenly kneels and notices the statue stopped the attack. He tells everyone to kneel to the statue, revealing that as long as their heads are below a certain height, the statue won't attack. In short, this is what the first commandment means. Everyone follows his movements, and the statue's eyes deactivate. They celebrate because the statue won't attack them, but Jinwoo knows this isn't over yet. Suddenly, the statue gets up and starts walking forward. Jinwoo mentions they need to follow the commandments, and now they must praise God. A random guy steps forward, claiming that he knows how to praise God and starts praying. However, Jinwoo realizes this guy is praying to the wrong god. The statue smiles and steps on him. Everyone panics and starts running, but the statue starts chasing everyone. One of the guys runs near a statue, but that statue moves and slices him in half. Jinwoo runs with Juhee and looks around. He notices there are some statues with some musical instruments and tells everyone to get near one of those statues. The statue starts playing the instrument, and they feel relieved because they have been spared. Jinwoo and Juhee manage to reach a statue, but it doesn't play. It can only play if there is only one person near it. He starts running away, looking for the next statue, but the huge one starts chasing him. It almost steps on him, but he manages to avoid it, rolling towards another one. This statue has a shield that also tries to kill him. Jinwoo manages to avoid fatal damage and crawls to the next statue. The huge statue is still walking behind him and prepares to step on him. Suddenly, the statue Jinwoo was crawling to started singing. The huge statue sits down on its throne, and Juhee checks on Jinwoo, but upon looking down, notices that he lost his foot. She tries to heal him with all her power, but ends up using so much of her power, and she starts coughing blood. The group starts to blame Song for this situation. Song apologizes for forcing them into a decision and decides to bear all responsibility. Suddenly, an altar is raised in the middle of the room. Everyone is confused, but Jinwoo says that's the final commandment, to believe in God. One of the members who voted yes grabs his sword and points at Song, mentioning they need a sacrifice. Since Song claimed that he would take responsibility, he decides to accept his fate and walks toward the altar. Suddenly, a flame appears. Jinwoo is confused and asks if they can take him to the altar so that he can check it. When the three reach near the altar, 3 more flames appear. Jinwoo thinks that if they fail here, this huge statue will run wild into their world. Meanwhile, Jinna goes to the hospital to visit her mother like she does every day. She talks about her day and future plans. Back inside the dungeon, Jinwoo tells Juhee and the rest to come to the altar. More flames appear, and a new ring of blue flames appears around it. The dungeon door suddenly opens up, and one of the blue flames disappears. The statues start to move forward, making everyone freak out. Jinwoo looks around and notices the statues won't move if they look at them. Everyone follows his instructions, and the statues stop moving. However, some members start running away from the circle. One of the normal flames extinguished, but she managed to leave the room. The door, however, is starting to close. Jinwoo thinks this is a trap because the last commandment is to believe in God. The door is just to test everyone's faith in the statue. However, another guy throws Jinwoo aside before running toward the door. More people think about leaving, but Jinwoo explains that if the blue flames are extinguished, everyone will be able to escape. Suddenly, a guy thanks Jinwoo for allowing them to survive, but he starts to cry and apologizes before running away. Jinwoo starts crying, asking why they betrayed him. Song orders Juhee and Jinwoo to escape while he stays behind. However, Juhee's legs give up, while Jinwoo angrily shouts that he has no foot, so he cannot help her. She starts complaining, but Song knocks her out because they're running out of time. Song then carries Juhee outside the door. Jinwoo notices a sword on the ground and picks it up, promising that he will take one of the statues to be his best buddy in hell. The statues attack him, making him lose one arm, followed by several other attacks. He shouts in pain, mentioning that he also wanted to become stronger, but he can't. After several attacks, he's barely alive but refuses to give up. The statues stab his shoulder, and he remembers those who just betrayed him, trying to justify it by mentioning their family. This is all selfishness because he also has a family that he wants to return to and take care of. In the end, the statue throws him into the altar while preparing for the last attack. He cries as the statue is about to slice him and the last blue flame goes out. A system message appears asking if he wants to become a player. He says yes. Another screen appears congratulating Jinwoo for becoming a player. Suddenly, he wakes up in the hospital in shock. He notices that he still has his arm and pulls the blanket to check if he has his leg. After confirming, he thinks that he was stabbed through the chest, but there's no mark. He thinks this was all a dream until someone knocks on the door. The guy is impressed that Jinwoo is awake and introduces himself Woo Jinchul, a manager of the Hunters Association surveillance team. Jinwoo wonders what they want from him, but Jinchul first asks his partner to get the doctor here. That's when Jinwoo finds out he was unconscious for the past 3 days. He asks about Juhee and Song, but the guy confirms they're fine despite Song losing his arm. As a result, he will be forced to retire as a hunter. Juhee, on the other hand, is still traumatized and getting psychiatric care. In her case, she won't probably continue working as a hunter. Jinwoo thinks about everything that happened, and Jinchul mentions that only 6 people survived that dungeon. He says that working as a hunter is dangerous, but it's still rare to see this type of outcome. However, he mentions that something was strange. The White Tiger Guild came to the dungeon after being alerted by the guys who ran away. However, they never saw a second room. All they saw was Jinwoo collapsed on the ground. They investigated, but found no evidence of the so-called temple or statues that everyone described. Jinwoo and Jinchul think that's unbelievable. However, every survivor said the same thing, and they found the bodies of the ones who died. Therefore, the Hunter Association cannot suspect the rest of the group for PKing everyone. Jinchul, however, reveals they suspect Jinwoo of experiencing a second awakening. Jinwoo is shocked to hear those words and remembers all he was taught. A hunter's power is determined when they awaken their power and never changes. However, there are some rare cases where a hunter goes through a second awakening. Some of them rose from low ranks to a or even his rank. Jinwoo tries to hide his excitement about this possibility. They then pull out a gadget to measure his power and tell him to put his hand over it. Jinwoo smiles, thinking this is his lucky day, and puts his hand. Jinchul, however, is thinking that it was impossible for Jinwoo to survive that type of described dungeon because he's weak. And since there isn't any evidence of the monsters, he thinks Jinwoo became either rank A or S. However, his score is a big fat 10. Jinwoo is excited to hear the result and what rank he will get now. Jinchul, however, apologizes for the mistake because Jinwoo is still worse than trash. They leave, and Jinchul's assistant mentions that every other E-rank hunter managed to get 70 or higher. While walking, Jinchul thinks they cannot explore that dungeon because it disappeared. But he still doesn't understand how Jinwoo survived. Meanwhile, Jinwoo is in his room thinking sorry for himself. Yet, he's confused because they never asked him about the screen in front of him. The screen shows that he has unread messages, and he thinks that he's the only one who can see it. He clicks on the screen, but it doesn't react. He suddenly remembers that when he was about to die, the screen showed that he completed the secret quest, Courage of the Weak. Suddenly, Jinna enters into the room and starts berating him. She tells him to take care of himself because that makes her worried. He apologizes and she complains, mentioning that he always ends up in the hospital while the others are fine. He looks at her and cannot believe he was prepared to leave her behind. He smiles at her, but she complains again. If this happens again, she will quit school and get a job so that he can quit being a hunter. He apologizes again and asks if she can see the Windows screen. She's confused and asks what he is talking about. He apologizes and asks her about games. He wants to know how he can read unread messages, but she thinks he's crazy and should get another medical checkup. He replies that she used to play tons of games, and she gives up, replying that he would be able to read it by opening his message box. He repeats those words, and the messages open. He notices that he has a daily quest called Strength Training has arrived. He thinks for a bit and remembers the word player was mentioned before. Jinna in the end gives up and leaves. Meanwhile, Jinwoo starts reading everything about this system. In short, it was made to help him develop. However, if he fails to follow the system, he will get a penalty. He then sees a screen mentioning the rewards have arrived and gets confused. He then accepts the daily quest and notices that he will become bald like Saitama. He must do 100 push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and then run 10 kilometers. If he doesn't complete them, he will be punished. Jinwoo laughs, mentioning he's in the hospital, therefore that's impossible to do, and takes a nap. Meanwhile, Jinchul is in the car telling his boss on a call that Jinwoo is still trash. The boss is at least happy. The monsters didn't leave the dungeon and started to roam on the streets. However, this is still pretty much confusing. Jinchul confirms this is weird, and they decide to mark this case as something special that will be revised on the future. Meanwhile, in another guild building, the guild leader tells his strongest member, Cha, to participate in a B-rank dungeon as instructor. She is confused because she's S rank, but he explains that raid will be a test and practical training for their new recruits, yet she still doubts her ability as a mentor. The leader replies she just needs to beat the monsters as usual, and everyone will learn from watching. She hesitates, but the guy mentions their guild is on the top 5 of the country, but they're unseen in the international level. He knows their ranks cannot improve, but their teamwork can. Hours later, a gate suddenly appears in the middle of the road. The military takes care of the whole situation while everyone wonders when the hunters are going to show up. Back in the hospital, Jinwoo is still sleeping. The daily quest timer runs down and warns that he failed. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking and Jinwoo wakes up. He ends up falling from his bed, but when he opens his eyes, he sees himself in the middle of the desert. He's confused about what's happening and thinks this is just a dream. However, there's a giant desert centipede looking at him. The system Windows then shows up and tells him to survive for the next 4 hours. Jinwoo is shocked and starts running. Meanwhile, the nurses check his room and notice that it's empty. Jinwoo is doing his best to run and scream from this huge centipede, but more appear. He's been running for 2 hours already. The nurses are looking for him, but they never find him. Luckily, Jinwoo manages to run for the whole 4 hours and returns to his room. The system alerts that he completed his penalty quest, but he collapses before checking the rewards. The nurses then enter his room again and get shocked to see him. The next day, Jinwoo finally gives up being a lazy loser and gets up from bed. He tells his sister on the phone that he will be released soon. After hanging the call, he gets up and starts doing his quest. Days later, Juhi receives a call inviting her to join a D-rank dungeon. She thinks about rejecting it and apologizes. The guy on the phone then mentions Jinwoo already awoke, and she decides to visit him. At the hospital, she hears the nurses complaining about Jinwoo running and exercising. They complain that hunters are supposed to heal faster than normal people, but they think he's crazy for doing this. Juhi looks outside the window and sees Jinwoo running. He takes a small break and talks about this situation. It's been 4 days since the Windows system appeared. Every time he completes the quest, he gets 3 types of rewards. He accepts full recovery and returns back to normal as if he never exercised. The other reward is 3 points that he can distribute to any ability he wants. He adds them to his strength and starts to feel stronger. He then talks about having skill and inventory screens, however he still thinks this is quite strange. He thinks this is just like a game, but everyone around thinks he's crazy. Upon returning to his room, Jinwoo decides to open his final reward, the random loot box. This time he got a key. He's confused because he always got stuff like pens or bandages. Upon checking the information, the system reveals he can use it to enter an instance dungeon in a specific location. He's confused with this, but thinks this is some sort of event that will help him get stronger. Meanwhile, nobody has raided the dungeon that appeared in the middle of the road. The news reveal in which locations new gates appeared, therefore everyone should expect traffic delays. Jinwoo uses this time to visit his mother in the other hospital. 4 years ago, she suddenly collapsed in front of him. Turns out that she now suffers from the eternal sleep disease. This is a new disease that appeared when the dungeon gates appeared in the world, and it only affects 1 in every several 10,000 people. But in short, this only happens when the person is exposed to mana for several times, and there's no cure. Jinwoo returns to his room to do push-ups while remembering when he tried to have a normal job. He was slow, weak, when suddenly it became easier. Turns out, he just awakened as a hunter. He thought this was his lucky day, as he could go into the dungeons and be able to pay for his mother's life support. His sister thought it was dangerous, but he told her to trust him. But in the end, even the weakest goblins were able to beat him. Everyone had to save him and complain about his skills. They even expressed that if didn't help the raid, his cut would be reduced. However, Jinwoo simply smiled and apologized. But now, if he puts all his ability points into strength, he will be able to become strong. He decides to check the instance dungeon key and goes to a station. He feels confident about his gear and ability to run if he needs to. He then pulls out the key and suddenly a key lock appears. He inserts it and a dungeon appears out of nowhere. He enters that portal and sees the system alert. Suddenly, the dungeon exit gets blocked. Jinwoo then sees normal people leaving the station and realizes this is a separate dimension. He thinks this kind of dungeon is something like a red gate. He thinks this is a mess because he cannot run away, but the system explains that he can only leave by defeating the boss or using a teleportation stone. He's confused, but he knows he must beat this dungeon. He still doubts himself. After all, he couldn't defeat the weakest monsters. How would he be able to solo raid this dungeon? He looks at his knife and knows he has no choice. He walks down the stairs and scouts the dungeon. Suddenly, 3 goblins appear in front of him. He's scared and remembers the last time he met a goblin, he was stabbed. The monsters attack, but he manages to dodge and parry. He's still a total noob when it comes to fighting and almost gets deleted. He manages to roll like a god doggo and avoid the next incoming strike. He then rushes forward and stabs the goblin. The other 2 try to attack him from behind, but he dodges and follows up by killing the 2. He realizes that he became stronger, yet a wolf appears behind him. The wolf dashes at him and he tries to block. However, his cheap butter knife breaks again. He notices the wolf has a meal jaw and knows this is way stronger than the goblins. He wants to run, but his legs are shaking. He starts to freak out and thinks that he became traumatized by the last dungeon. The wolf runs at him and manages to scratch his face. Jinwoo realizes that he has no healer. If he dies here, he's dead. The wolf then starts running again and lunges at him. Watch this next video. See you on the next one.